for a informative panel discussion. I'd like to invite up Christine Parasek, Tina Mendez, John Olson, and Allison O'Dowd up to the front. So we've got two panels for you this morning. This first panel is a joint CSU-UC panel, and we're going to be talking about teaching and basically professional development of students and training the next generation of freshwater science professionals. It was so heartening to see so many hands go up, CSU alum, so we're going to be talking a little bit about what we can do collectively in public higher education in California to ensure that this field continues to grow and we bring in more people into the fold. So we're going to start with just having everyone briefly introduce yourself, give us your name and your current position, and if you can just very briefly tell us what was your own path into freshwater science. What was there one moment or what brought you in this here today, I guess?
Testing? Okay. Hi everybody, I'm Christine Parasek. I'm currently a PhD student here at UC Davis. And what got me interested in freshwater ecology, basically I was an undergraduate and I was on a pre-dental track up until my last semester of college when I took my first ecology class. And clearly that was when I learned about research and found out that it was a thing. And so I sort of turned everything around. I took GRE instead of the DAT, and I went to a master's program with Matt, and now I'm here.
I'm John Olson. I'm an assistant professor at Cal State Monterey Bay. I left active duty in the late 90s and went and got a master's degree in environmental science. I'm working on that. The department head, Jim Gore, invited me to join one of our projects doing something called Bioassessment in Georgia. So I went to a meeting with him in Georgia DNR and met Mike Barber, who gave me a 15-minute view into bioassessment before the meeting, so I knew what I was talking about. And that was how I ended up here.
Hi, I'm Tina Mendez. I'm a continuing lecturer at UC Berkeley, and I came into this probably because I was just outside all of the time as a kid, like going to summer camp and doing all those things. But when I was in college, I came to this field through entomology. I took an entomology class and we were out there blacklighting, and there were like insects up. I'm from Texas, so there's like a lot of insects. And we had insects up our nose, and they were crawling all over us. And then I ended up taking an aquatic entomology class with the same professor, who was the most exciting person I've ever met, who was so into it. He's like, maggots, aren't they awesome? You know, so that's where, and I'm like, yes, they are awesome. You know, so that's how I came at this.
I'm Allison O'Dowd. I'm a professor at Humboldt State University, and I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I was like singularly focused on that. And then I did a summer research internship working on streams and looking at stream restoration. And coming out of just that one summer opportunity, then I just totally changed gears and got a lot more interested and invigorated about rivers and streams.
So thank you. Next question, we just want each of you to briefly describe your role working with students. What are some of the day-to-day activities? What is it like working with students in the CSU or UC system, or even thinking back to your own experience as students?
Like a river.
Okay, like a river. Okay. So I guess I first started working with students as a grad student at UC Berkeley. There's great opportunities there. As a grad student, you can have undergrads work with you. So that was my first experience sort of mentoring and working with undergrads. And now as a professor at HSU, I right now have an army of undergrads, and you should come by my lab. It's very active and busy. We have about close to 10 undergrads and 3 graduate students. And so day to day, I've actually learned, I think I learned this from Vince Resch about delegation. It's like your grad students really become more of the managers of the undergrads. So I think I'm more like executive level now. I don't know. That's so horrible to admit. Okay. So yeah. So really, primarily, you know, when I first started at HSU, it was very hands-on. I was training all the students directly. I was working through keys and everything. And now, I don't know, whatever machine we've built, now the grad students are sort of outpacing me in terms of their expertise. So I'd love to see that. I'd love to see people really grab something and run with it. So that's been something I've learned just through working with undergrads and training them.
And then I teach a senior research course in environmental sciences, which is a UC Berkeley program that's been running for about 50 years now, or we're coming up on our 50th year. And every student in our major is required to do a year-long senior thesis, and it's been like that for the last 50 years. So I co-instruct a course with a social scientist as an interdisciplinary thesis course, and we have about 60 students a year who do a year-long thesis. We call it like a mini master's, and we just like boot camp them through how do you write, how do you put together a study, how do you analyze data. We don't know how to do logistic regression, let's watch YouTube, like, you know, things like that. Like, and it's amazing how resourceful the students are at accessing their mentors and figuring things out and just really learning about how to be a scientist. So not all my students are freshwater sciences. I usually get 3 or 4 a year. And then I also work with a number of one-on-ones with undergraduates. We do museum studies at Tricontra with the Essing Museum.
So my experience is actually similar to the last two. You know, my lab, I only started my lab less than 2 years ago now. And I actually had people coming in the door within the first month saying, hey, can I do research in your lab? I'm like, sure, you go do this, sure, you go do that. And then I got graduate students been in charge, like Allison has done. And I also started teaching what we call capstone at our university, where basically part of my freshwater ecology class basically has to go off and do a separate project for their, similar to the senior thesis, but it's only a semester-long activity. So I've had students look at the effects of fire, students look at the effects of invasive species on streams. And the only thing I would add to this is I spent a lot of time actually pushing freshwater science into other places. So I also teach GIS, so I talk a lot about watersheds and talking about how we use GIS in a watershed context, looking at freshwater ecology. I helped teach a class on the natural environments of California, and I basically teach them, you know, the stream ecology of the Sierras at that point.
My experience working with students started in my master's program when I was teaching undergraduates. So I started teaching with teaching biology to the non-majors and then to some majors as well, so I've had experience there. And now my experience is TAing here at UC Davis. Working with students, I would say I've noticed the difference that especially in the labs at CSUs are smaller. In some cases the lectures are too, but here at UC's, our lecture that I'm supposed to be at later today, but I'll be missing it for my talk, is 122 students in our class. And so we're still interested in trying to get active learning into the classroom, but it's a much bigger challenge of trying to get 120 students engaged, working on an in-class activity, and then bringing it back to lecture, and then doing a few activities.
One thing I just wanted to add, I know I'm breaking the rules, is just through reflecting on what folks have just said, is that there's different mechanisms and ways for undergrads to get involved. One is for credit, you know, you can enroll in research units, paid opportunities, and also, as Tina and John mentioned, capstone projects. So that's in combination, there's a lot of different avenues students can take.
Next question is thinking about by what pathways do students find their way into the field of freshwater science? And so all of you have mentioned the various ways you work with students, and oftentimes, you know, you do have students knocking on the door saying, hey, I want to do something in freshwater science. But I think I'm more interested in maybe what are some of the barriers or challenges that students may face So thinking about there's some students who find that path very easily and there are others who don't. Some students are maybe left out of this potential pathway. So what are your thoughts? What are some of those barriers and challenges to reaching students, and how can we help them succeed academically and professionally, and eventually joining us here in this room as freshwater science professionals?
So actually I thought the last part of that question about who doesn't find the path would be the most intriguing part. I actually talked to my students about, so what friends of yours got left behind who didn't come into freshwater science? And it really comes down to, I think, exposure. Getting exposed early. I think sometimes some people get it, they come to a biology program, they devote a lot of time into biology without going into freshwater science until they discover it at the very end. And at that point, they're not likely to invest, or they're marine science doing the same thing. It's tough for some people to change course the last semester, as several people here have done. So actually, I think one of the ways we might improve upon this is actually trying to get more exposure to freshwater science at younger ages, so people are thinking about freshwater science earlier.
I think that the people who get left out are the ones who have never, either they haven't grown up hearing about graduate school, freshwater science and such, or maybe they're a first-generation student at school and their parents didn't go through grad school or understand how that whole system works. And so in my experience, I also hadn't heard about grad school at all, so it was really down to the teachers in my classroom whether or not they talked about how they got that PhD at the end of their name. We called them doctor, but I don't think a lot of us knew why they were doctor. We knew that they went to school for it, but we didn't know what they did, what it really took. And you learn about the scientific method, but we never really connected it to that's what they did to get their PhD, and that you can go in and do that too. So in my experience, it wasn't until my last semester that I really realized it's an option. I understood how to actually go about doing it, and at one point, halfway through that last semester, I went up to my professor. I had a fake question kind of staged as an excuse to come into the class, and then finally, as I was about to leave, I said, so you've been mentioning grad school a few times on our field days, what is it? So it's really kind of about talking about it more with your students and getting that information to them.
And so I think a lot of kind of what I was going to say was covered here, but it's interesting, and I did want to talk a little bit about part of this question of being how do students come to us? And I have seen with my students, there's this great concern of water in California. Students in California have lived through droughts, they know how to turn off that water, they fix all the dripping sinks, all of this sort of stuff, and there's this deep want to participate and be part of finding solutions. And that's what I've really seen in my students, is they want to look for solutions. And so I think some of that of who can find the path and who can get left out is really trying to help students find positions, either after graduation that they can use these degrees. Sometimes they're internships, sometimes they're just the one-day opportunities of giving people exposure to jobs. So can they see themselves in the same job that you have? Are they interested in what you're doing? And I think if folks are able to do that, that outreach piece and making sure that internships are available is a huge part about keeping people from being left out, people who don't want to ask about that sort of thing. But there's so many great students, it's so exciting to work with them.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that the obstacle of not having a lot of degrees specifically in freshwater science or departments in freshwater science, I was hired into an environmental science department to teach courses in restoration ecology, so I've never once taught a course in aquatic ecology. And so trying to find students and get the word out, so trying to just advertise positions, if we have research positions widely, or when I give a research talk, if I say, if this stuff was interesting to you, come talk to me, instead of giving the advantage to students that take the initiative to come see you and say, hey, can I work in your lab? That often leaves other students out who don't take that initiative. So just trying to get the word out. One quick story is I asked two of my former grad students, how did you even find me to work with me to do a freshwater science project? And they said they just Googled freshwater science master's degree, and I somehow popped up. So I guess put the word freshwater science a lot on my webpage or something, but that was fascinating to me that just in Google, that's how those students ended up finding me, which is strange.
Okay, we've got one more question, and then I think we'll have some time so we can open it up to questions from the audience. Last question is, the whole theme here, this conference is looking back the last 25 years and then looking ahead. And so I wonder if each of you could share, what is your personal vision for, both for yourself and for the higher education in California, for the CSU and UC systems? What is your vision for the role we can all play in education and professional development of freshwater science in California in the next 25 years?
Okay, I'll go first. I don't have a lot of experience, obviously, working even with both schools. I've worked only for a few years or less. But just from the talk from earlier today, where the funding really goes, if there was a way for the CSUs and UCs to sort of work more together, where all the research is happening at UCs, but all the students who really want to get into the field could be at the CSUs. So if there was a way of bridging that gap, I think that might be one way forward.
I think I kind of had written down 3 things in this response, and I think it's like really doing a lot of outreach to youth, like kids. Like it seems that everybody had this, at least some sort of formative experience, and if we can kind of bring kids in and give them those opportunities, or just talking to kids, it makes a huge difference. Including continuing to include students in undergraduate research, because I think that gives the students this like feeling that they can do it, and then you have these opportunities to talk, and then you get to talk about jobs and your personal history, and students really like hearing about where people come from and where they're going and what they thought about and what opportunities are out there. So just talking to students and then helping them find these positions after graduation, either with colleagues, like so many of my students have worked with many of you. Every time they approach me for a job, they're like, I'm interested in this. I'm like, oh, let's call Rafi. Or like, let's call this person. Let's do this. They have this data set. And I think if we can keep making those connections, it makes a huge difference to getting those students to the places they want to be.
Yeah, just to sort of elaborate on that is, as we're training students and really giving them an opportunity to come to conferences like this or SFS or any professional conference where they can get that practice presenting a poster. So it's any sort of way that even as a society, Cal SFS can financially support those students and continue to bring them so that they get those networking opportunities and also get that intellectual exchange experience as well.
So kind of echoing on some of the same ideas, I bring my students to conferences like that, so hopefully you all saw my students' posters yesterday. They really my students really enjoy the chance to interact with all of you, and I really think it gives them a good exposure to what they can, gives them an idea of what is really possible out there in terms of the future. I kind of designed my freshwater ecology class really to be focused on applied and really tied to bioassessment, so I'm a bioassessment guy, and I think it's my strength. And I basically use my course to teach freshwater ecology through the lens of bioassessment, and they basically leave but completely understand how bioassessment is done from field all the way through data analysis. And it's really interesting that I've actually had 2 my students who now have gotten jobs with the water board, partly because of their background in my class, which is always good to hear back from your students that they're actually having an effect. And finally, just trying to expand how bioassessment is done in California and how bioassessment is done in the West, trying to continue to push some of the boundaries in a research capacity, both in terms of, trying to incorporate, now dry streams, now eDNA, and trying to bring in new ideas and get students excited about pursuing those new ideas on their own as part of their research.
Thank you all. Let's give the panelists a quick hand. And open it up to questions and comments from the audience. I'm going to do the kind of, what's it, Maury Povich?
Right. It's going to run the mic around.
I appreciated the chats that you guys did, but none of you addressed the issue of the minority students. And you know, as I've been thinking about this, part of it's the economics of it, right? You know, you're probably not going to get super wealthy becoming a stream ecologist. So I wonder if you can deal with both parts of that question.
I can speak a little bit to that because I'm part of the Society for Freshwater Science has a diversity program called the InSTARS program, where we bring undergraduate students to our meetings so that they have the opportunity to present posters and to meet faculty. Because one of the key barriers with graduate school is you look at it and you look at all these applications and you look at how much is this thing going to cost, and for students in like the freshwater sciences, usually they're reasonably funded so that you can go to graduate students. So we try, at least with that program, to remove that first barrier. So you're able to go to the meeting and you don't have to visit a bunch of schools, you actually meet faculty and graduate students and hear about the diversity of fields that you can go into and jobs. And I think that is like one of the things that we're doing to do that. And I think the other piece is that recognizing, like we try to grab every student we can. So especially diversity students, because that question is most of the students that are underrepresented minority students that approach me, part of them approach me because of my last name, because I am a Latina in science, and that's like exciting, right? Because I never had a faculty member that was Latina in science. And that's one piece. And then I say, okay, you can do this, we can get this all done. But also just this piece about, like, for me with placement, I know that students have to work after graduation. And most of our first generation college students and underrepresented students cannot work for free. They have loans to pay back, they've got things to do. So really looking for those internships or like watershed stewards programs that are gonna get them experience while also getting paid is a key thing. So if you have paid internships, let us know, because we can actually try to make sure students can get into those positions. And so I think that's how, on some level, we're trying to address the diversity issue.
So this is actually a question I struggle with a lot. I'm not really sure how to approach this and how to make it better. The one thing that I'm able to do, though, is by basically employing a great deal of undergraduates in my lab. I'm actually able to bring in lots of people of diverse backgrounds into this, into freshwater science. They come to me mostly because they want a job that's doing something besides working at Starbucks, and they seem to get more out of it, and they really enjoy doing it.
My experience teaching at CSU Stanislaus, or Stan State, we're a primarily minority serving institution, and so most of my class, I'm sometimes the only white person in the classroom. And I basically was just trying, knowing that a lot of them were also first generation and didn't know they have loans to pay and things to take care of their own parents that they're sometimes supporting and working at the same time. I was just trying to give them as much information and be as open as possible with them and encourage them to come talk to me. Sometimes I'd slip things in at the end of lecture of like different internships or things, different opportunities, and also emphasizing that you don't have to necessarily pay to be going to grad school. There should be a way of getting supported through the faculty, and that there are ways to do that, and I can help them figure that out. And so I had some students approach me or want to apply for like the McNair Scholars Program. I don't know if some of you have heard of that, to help them with funding and paying for the GRE.
Got a couple other questions to the audience. If we have enough time here. I saw Dave's hand.
Good morning. Yeah, just a quick comment to follow on this. It's more of a comment, not a question. I think what you're doing sounds like it was a good response. It's a good way to reach out to the kids that or students that don't necessarily have the safety net and resources. But I think something the scientific community in general should consider is not just waiting for them to come to you, but go to them. Because a lot of kids are not exposed to the process of graduate school at all. They have this nebulous, unknown black hole. And especially minority groups, they don't have that safety net in their family that, and mentors to guide them. So they don't even know or have a concept sometimes of the process at all, or scholarships to be asking for, or how to Google anything that you're talking about. I think outreach, going to these communities, is a big key piece, not just waiting for them to knock on your door.
Feedback to that? Or?
While you're moving around, I'll just add, So I started with a degree. I actually was able to actually work with a middle school class of entirely immigrant children, where I had to do everything through the translator. I have no Spanish. Just watching those kids, getting them in the stream and teaching what's in the stream, just the excitement, it was one of the things where it was one of the most rewarding things I've done this semester.
Yeah, so maybe this is just kind of a follow-on to that. A lot of this has been focused on how do we educate and serve the student populations of the CSUs and UCs, but how about the outreach into not only local communities, but far-flung communities to enhance an appreciation for the need of freshwater science in a civilized society?
I'll go first on that one. Then, my graduate students have actually taken the lead on that. I mean, they're actually involved in multiple different outreach programs that are within the greater Monterey County area. So they've actually done more outreach than I have actually had a chance to do. In terms of trying to get into the farther flung, it's easier to do something close by the university, but it's a bit of a challenge to get out into small communities in Salinas Valley, for instance. That is something that is a challenge. It's hard to find the time and the connections to make those things happen. But something we definitely ought to be working on.
One thing we've done recently is bringing high school students to sit in on classes at HSU and take tours of the lab. And by the end of that, I usually have students, hey, can you contact me for ways to get involved? And so, yeah, we've made some strides towards bringing in, at least at the high school level, getting them involved in freshwater science research.
Well, now, okay, so I think we are just about out of time. I appreciate there's a lot of people who have things to say, and we can definitely continue this conversation at the break. We're going to transition to a second panel. Let's give these panelists one more round of thanks.